And last but of course not least, it's my privilege tonight to introduce our guest speaker, Mayor Lori E. Lightfoot. We're going to have a great conversation, but I do want to provide a few background remarks so you can learn more about the mayor. Throughout her career, Mayor Lightfoot has embodied the ideal of public service through her leadership role in numerous positions, including chair of the Police Accountability Task Force, president of the Chicago Police Board, and her service in the U.S. Attorney's Office, among other positions. Born and raised in Ohio, Mayor Lightfoot was the youngest child of a working-class family. Growing up, Mayor Lightfoot's parents instilled in her the importance of education, integrity, loyalty, and excellence, leading her to earn a degree at the University of Michigan. And even better, a law degree from the University of Chicago Law School. So those academic achievements were followed by an illustrious career in private practice as a senior equity partner at Mayer Brown here in Chicago. Since assuming office in May, Mayor Lightfoot has faced significant challenges, and we'll talk about some of those tonight. She's also embarked on an ambitious agenda of inclusive economic development and long-term growth for all of us here in Chicago. She is very focused on public safety, financial stability, and good governance. She's already delivered historic measures in government ethics and workers' compensation. And in October, she announced the Invest Southwest Revitalization Plan for Chicago's South and West Sides, which is a key measure in her broader vision to uplift communities, transform our economy, and unlock the full potential of our entire city. So what else does the mayor have planned for the great city of Chicago? Well, it's time to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving Mayor Lori E. Lightfoot a warm Economic Club of Chicago welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, Deb, for that introduction. And thank you all for being here tonight. I want to give a special thanks to the Economic Club of Chicago. And I have to give a shout out to the folks here at the Hilton. We joke that I'm here like every other day, it seems like. But the staff here is tremendous, and they have just done a tremendous job. I want to start this evening with a piece of Chicago political history that informs the discussions I want to have with you tonight. So think back to May of 1992. There was a funeral for a former Chicago alderman named Bill Henry. According to press accounts of the time, the number of mourners spilled into the church balcony for the service that was heralded as the homecoming celebration for a beloved local leader. To know Bill Henry was to know a colorful, gregarious, charismatic fixture on Chicago's West Side, a self-styled Robin Hood of his community who is eulogized as a quote-unquote man of the people. The truth is that he was an outrageously corrupt politician. A year and a half before his death, then Alderman Bill Henry was indicted on 24 counts of racketeering, mail fraud, bribery, extortion, income tax evasion, among other charges, to name a few. And he died of cancer before he faced his day in federal court. This was a man who literally put his ward up for sale, the most notorious example of which was an illegal dump located in North Lawndale known as Mount Henry. And I think we have a picture of that. The dump was, in fact, two adjacent dumps spanning approximately 10 square blocks, which at their peak reached 6 stories high. In the spring of 1990, tens of thousands of trucks began dumping loads of construction waste, gravel, bricks, and rusted metal in this site that was across the street from homes, businesses, a church, and even an elementary school, caking these buildings with huge amounts of dust, flooding the basements of nearby homes as a result of the runoff, and causing elevated levels of asthma, among other health problems for the nearby residents. Meanwhile, the site itself became a magnet for rats and crime, including fly-by-night dumping that was in addition to the bribe-paid-for illegal dumping that was already going on. The site earned the moniker of Mount Henry because everyone in the community knew that dumping was happening, and they knew that Bill Henry was allowing it to happen. And they were right, to the tune of $5,000 a month in bribes paid and solicited by Bill Henry. Now, I'm sharing this story to illustrate several critical points about our past and present, and also to emphasize the importance of charting an entirely new course for our city on many fronts, but in particular when it comes to economic development and investment. First, Bill Henry and his corruption are one of the most outrageous examples of aldermanic prerogative gone amok. This system invariably picks a small amount of winners and a significant number of losers. And the losers are invariably Black and brown communities and individuals, but also small and middle market businesses and ordinary residents who just want access to basic city services without having to kiss anyone's ring or other body part. What do they say? The truth will set you free. And aldermanic prerogative is not only about the exercise of unchecked unilateral power. It's a problem because of the systemic deference that is given even in the face of a looming, costly problem that taxpayers from every ward in Chicago have to bear. Bill Henry was an extreme bad actor, but he was able to thrive in a system that rewarded his craven thirst for power and money. And that system, ladies and gentlemen, is not dead. Now, we have taken some powerful steps to defeat it and curb its excesses, but that fight continues. Now, another lesson to be learned from Bill Henry's example is what happens when the city fails to have a coherent economic development and investment strategy. And some of you know that the city of Chicago has not had a comprehensive land use plan since 1966. Yes, 1966. That means when, where, and how development happened is largely left to the vagaries of developers and local aldermen. And as a consequence, we have seen over time communities south of Roosevelt Road and west of Ashland slowly but decidedly wither on the vine. Why does this matter to this crowd? Because our neglect of communities like Roseland, where the unemployment rate is 26% compared to the city average of about 3%, or Austin, where 35% or more of the people in that community depend upon public assistance for their daily bread instead of a job on which they can build a life and a future. That neglect and disinvestment is not cost-free. We pay for that neglect and lack of economic development in many profound ways, and let me give you a few examples. The most notable of these is violence. The epidemic of violence is an epidemic of hopelessness that comes from the absence of healthy, safe, and stable communities that support the lives and aspirations of individuals and families. We literally spend billions of dollars every year on local policing alone to barely move the needle in certain communities. The reality that we must all embrace is that not only can we not police our way out of these problems, but the better, smarter play for those who are in the business community, that will have the greater return on investment is to invest in the people and communities to get them stabilized and ready for growth. Another way that we are paying dearly because of our lack of investment is in life expectancy. In many of these poor, economically distressed neighborhoods, the difference in life expectancy is decades compared with healthier communities. For example, if you look at Washington Park on the south side and you compare life expectancy for those residents, which is at 69 years, with that of its border neighborhood of Hyde Park, where the life expectancy is 82 years, you see this glaring disparity. And by the way, a life expectancy of 69 years is not something that we have seen in the United States since the 1960s. It is much more like something we expect to see in the third world, not in a city like Chicago, in the state of Illinois, in the United States, where we have unbelievable wealth at our fingertips. And another important point is this disparity in life expectancy, which we see in neighborhood after neighborhood, again, on the south and the west side. It's not driven by gun violence. It's a result of a lack of access to healthy food, to medicine, healthcare, and the kind of things that people in this room take for granted as our right as Americans to have to support what we know is important. Mental health and trauma is another glaring need that becomes exacerbated when you don't invest in human capital in the surrounding environment. Here is a heartbreaking example. Back in the fall, Dr. Jackson and I met with a group of principals on a range of educational issues. I asked them what was keeping them up at night. And to my great surprise, they said the following. They talked about 5-year-olds that were coming into kindergarten exhibiting suicidal ideations and cutting themselves, inflicting other forms of self-harm. 5-year-olds. The level of trauma that people are experiencing in our city is profound, and we will now spend more money to address it because of our neglect. And while CPS students are achieving at remarkable levels, it is still against the odds. No question that success could be deeper and broader if we were not fighting against decades of underinvestment in our schools. And again, I have to, because Dr. Jackson is here, give her and her team all the credit for the tremendous job that they are doing. But we can do more, and we will do more to make sure that we are enhancing educational outcomes. Another example, and I'll leave you, this is the last one before I leave you in a completely depressed state. But one last way in which the failure to invest manifests itself is in population loss. People are disinvesting in us, and their exodus has a cascading effect, and we'll talk more on that in a moment. But the bottom line is this. For all of our many strengths as a city, and there are many, we will continue to be punching below our weight when just a few miles from here, lots remain vacant, homes are left abandoned, and thriving businesses very quickly become few and far between. Folks, this just doesn't make sense. But as disheartening as it is to encounter all of these things, and I've seen them all over and over again in my travels across the city, what I also see is opportunity, untapped potential, and the starting point from which we can take our incredible city to even greater heights where every single one of our businesses and residents have the possibility of participating in the greatness of this city. We have diagnosed the problem. What we need now is to focus on how we move forward together as a city of inclusive growth and prosperity, where opportunity for success is available for those who want it, regardless of their background or zip code. As we bring 2019 to a close, I want to look forward not just to 2020 or 2021, but to an economic plan that extends to 2030, 10 years from now. This is a plan built on 4 central tenets, and let me talk a little bit about those. First and foremost tenet is economic growth first and foremost tenet of our economic growth plan is government ethics and reform. Now, why are we linking economic growth with government ethics and reform? Well, the answer is simple. In order for Chicago to move forward, our residents and businesses need to trust their government's ability to be focused on putting people first and being effective stewards of their tax dollars. That happens through further ethics reforms, oversight of city government, and streamlining regulations to make it easier to do business in the city of Chicago. This work is hard, but essential. Bill Henry is long gone, but the system that allowed him to thrive still exists, and I don't want to have to rely upon federal agents and prosecutors to set us on the right path. We have to own this moment and clean our own house. A second plank of our strategy is, not surprisingly, inclusive economic growth. That means growing quality jobs, attracting and retaining a growing middle-class families, ensuring investment is provided across neighborhoods, and driving development that will increase Chicago's population by 10%. The third plank is public safety and health. I want Chicago to be the safest big city in the United States, where everyone in every community is not only is in fact safe, but feels safer. That means looking beyond our own city resources and coordinating policy that accounts for the full public safety and health landscape that exists in Chicago. Fourth, but certainly not least, is the imperative that we tackle our city's finances. Everyone here knows last month the City Council passed a budget that not only closes an historic $838 million gap through structural solutions and reform-minded measures. It also, for the first time in our city's history, pays our public safety pensions, that's police and fire, at a level needed to ensure their long-term stability. You can certainly clap at that. By 2023, our plan is to complete the picture by achieving both full structural balance with our budget and climbing all 4 of our pension ramps to actuarial funding. Though these 4 issues may seem distinct, they're not. Each requires a singular but also simultaneous focus because they all serve to support and reinforce each other. Just as a lack of economic development leads to higher rates of violence, so do violence levels in neighborhoods inhibit their ability to attract investment. I'm proud to say that we've already gotten off to a productive start on each of these fronts in a short time since I became mayor. In addition to the budget, which I already mentioned, we passed the most comprehensive ethics reform package in recent memory. Some examples. We took steps in professionalizing the $100 million per year workers' compensation program, and we believe that in the long term, we're going to yield significant savings by just taking it out of the hands of a single alderman, actually allowing professionals to run the program, and having a real plan to get people back to work rather than letting claims linger unresolved for over a decade while we continue to pay. We've embarked on reforming the debilitating and self-defeating system of punitive fines and fees, and as I always do, I want to thank Clerk Valencia for her leadership on this issue. And we've undertaken a comprehensive public safety initiative predicated on addressing the underlying circumstances surrounding gun violence and calling it what it is, a public health crisis. But this is only the beginning. While I'll elaborate on all 4 of these areas, I'm going to offer my greatest focus on the inclusive economic development. And when I speak about inclusive economic development, I'm not only talking about growth, I'm also talking about our need to rebuild our communities. An essential outcome of this plan, as I mentioned, is growing our population and returning it to 3 million residents. This is what we are looking at today. As you might be able to see from this slide, and I'm not so sure, income inequality has become staggeringly more pronounced over the last 50 years, with particular impact on our south and west sides. Not surprisingly, it's in these same communities where we are experiencing significant population loss. On this, Chicago is unfortunately alone among big cities, as others have seen steady increases over the last few years. And you can't really see this well, I don't think, but what this shows is that while other cities that we compare ourselves to on a number of different fronts are actually having population growth, our population is stagnating and slightly declining. We have to do better. In respect to economic growth, our strategy focuses on maintaining our strengths in foundational industry sectors while also doubling down on 4 priority areas. Our foundational sectors are those that have served as historic strengths and represent significant levels of workforce. These include industrial, manufacturing sector, food processing, and professional and corporate services. We need to maintain our leadership position in these industries and connect our residents to available jobs. From a policy perspective, a large part of our focus will be on 4 growth industries. These are sectors which exhibit strong potential to accelerate economic growth and, importantly, advance inclusive growth as well as resilience when faced with headwinds such as automation or macroeconomic downturns. In terms of growth industries, my team, in partnership with World Business Chicago and Andy Zopp and business leaders across the city, have identified 4 areas. First, transportation, distribution, and logistics. Not only is Chicago home to the largest intermodal system in the Western Hemisphere, but our transportation, distribution, and logistics sector is positioned for even more dynamic growth, especially as we expand and embark on an ambitious $8.5 billion expansion at O'Hare Airport. Another indication of the potential in this sector is the announcement last summer by Uber Freight to locate its headquarters in Chicago's Old Main Post Office, bringing 2,000 jobs and more than $200 million annually in workforce and real estate investments to Chicago. And we will continue to expand our industry leadership by actively recruiting more TD&L companies, enhancing our infrastructure, and targeting workforce investments. Our second priority sector won't be a surprise to anyone in this room, and it's technology. Both pure tech services like software development and cybersecurity, as well as technology that operates at the intersection of other industries, such as advanced manufacturing and financial technology. The tech industry is the fastest growing sector of Chicago's economy. Meanwhile, Chicago has one of the largest pools of tech talent in the nation. We will continue to build this sector out in every direction and do more to tell the story of the Silicon Prairie that is growing and thriving through initiatives like P33 and our support for the DPI initiative led by the University of Illinois. Our third priority sector is tourism and hospitality. Last year, we saw a record number of tourists visit Chicago. In October, I was thrilled to announce that for the 3rd year in a row, Chicago is named as the #1 best big city for tourists by Condé Nast. But we can't rest on our laurels, and we have to expand our pipeline of attractions and extend the presence of tourists and their dollars in our vibrant neighborhoods and build Chicago's tourism brand with a particular focus on international visitors. Our final target growth area is healthcare and life sciences. Chicago has the most top-ranked teaching hospitals in the nation, as well as one of the densest concentrations of medical research centers. You can give a shout out for the teaching hospitals. We will make investments in our workforce pipeline in this sector and develop more innovation hubs to attract corporate expansions and entrepreneurial activity. But as I mentioned earlier, Growth represents only half of our plan for inclusive development. The other half is rebuilding communities. On this point, I want to make a couple of particular points of emphasis. We cannot hope to sustainably grow our economy by simply relying upon growth to the exclusion of rebuilding our communities. This is not a question of political ideology or even a matter of opinion. Here in Chicago, we have, to our credit, experienced levels of growth and economic activity in recent years that are truly remarkable, resulting in Chicago leading the nation in corporate relocations and foreign direct investment. And our city has become, as I mentioned, a regional hub for tech innovation. And yet, despite that, poverty persists at alarming rates while we continue to lose population. While companies and industries have been investing in our city, our residents in key neighborhoods have been packing up and moving out. What is happening, and it is happening largely on the south and west sides. To turn this around, we have embarked on an ambitious Marshall Plan for these communities, starting with flooding these areas with improvements to their physical transit infrastructure. Not to mention access to broadband and 5G, improvements to schools, libraries, and other institutions. And I have to point out Maurice Cox, who was our still recent Commissioner of Planning and Development, and his team, who we stole from Detroit because he knows about how to build safe, vibrant neighborhoods and using planning as a tool to spur economic growth. And we are also increasing housing equity through home ownership programs, preserving quality rental stock, repurposing vacant lots and buildings, and establishing new housing funding sources by reforming the city's Affordable Requirements Ordinance. On top of that, we are overhauling the city's historic reliance on structurally regressive policies, such as economically debilitating fines and fees. We are focusing on economic corridors for near-term investment and leveraging anchor institutions. And Deb gave a little preview, but let me give a little more detail around our proposal and our initiative that we're calling Invest Southwest. Earlier this year, I joined numerous elected officials, community members, and business leaders, including many in this room, to announce our city's Invest Southwest plan, which coordinates the full power of our city across government, business, philanthropic, and community sectors to invest in commercial cores of 10 underinvested neighborhoods on the south and the west sides. All told, through Invest Southwest, the city alone will channel more than $750 million over the next 3 years while mobilizing a multiplier of private capital. All of us in this room, and especially us in this room, have a responsibility to be part of this mission of transformation for our city. I invite you to support our Invest Southwest initiative however possible, and I want to tell you that when we made this announcement, Dave Casper from BMO was there in the room, and he put down $10 million to be focused in the Austin community. Since that time, thank you. And since that time, Starbucks has come forward with another $10 million. Jump on board, folks. We're doing some great things, but we need your help. And this isn't just about philanthropy or charity. There is business opportunity in our neighborhoods. In Austin neighborhood on Chicago's west side, 80% of retail spend, estimated at nearly $200 million annually, leaks to the neighboring suburbs. God bless Oak Park, but I want that money spent in Chicago. I invite you to invest, to support our Invest Southwest initiative. Whether expanding your company's footprint, investing from your balance sheet into neighborhood projects or community development organizations, or expanding your workforce initiatives to hire residents from one of our 10 focus groups, we need your partnership and investment. And you can join BMO and Starbucks in this initiative. And to support the initiative, please reach out to Samir Mayakar, our Deputy Mayor for Economic and Neighborhood Development, who's here on the dais. In the coming years, we will be working to expand Invest Southwest to include other neighborhoods and other communities. That's because in creating a more inclusive and equitable city means making it more inclusive and equitable for our entire city. I mentioned that I recently appointed Maurice Cox as our Commissioner for Development and Planning, who did remarkable things in Detroit. He knows how to build neighborhoods, and we're going to be supporting that work. A key way in which we're going to do that is we have a plan and we have planners. And all we need is support of our city's leaders to turn our vision into a fully formed economy into a reality. When we do that, we will not only be giving hope to neighborhoods, we will halt the exodus of families leaving our city and see our population grow. I'm aware that I keep returning to this theme of population growth, and that's intentional and for a good reason. We will not be able to progressively develop the city revenues we need unless we attract, retain, and grow our population. Our population levels have recently moved between stagnation and outright decline. But the truth is, Chicago's been experiencing population loss for many years. But previously, those losses were somewhat countered by the influx of immigrant and refugees. However, given the current climate at the national level, in terms of our immigration policy, that's no longer the case. The question of population loss goes beyond the loss of our tax base and earning potential. We are currently running the risk of losing federal dollars from the upcoming 2020 census by as much as $1,800 per person per year multiplied by 10 years. A fact that could be devastating to our city and our economy because we will not only lose a congressional district, we will lose economic power for our city and for our state. These are even deeper implications for population loss as well. Some of you know a UIC professor named Janet Smith. She's done a detailed report on neighborhoods. Chicago's income, and based on her study, Chicago's income inequality doubled between 1970 and 2010 as a number of middle-class neighborhoods uprooted to the suburbs, exacerbating the confounding effects of racial segregation and its relationship with income inequality and income segregation. That is why our plan not only seeks to stem the population loss, but to turn our excesses around and get our population to grow from 2.7 up to 3 million residents. We need that 10% growth to get back our lost customers, our lost earnings, and our lost investment. Now, these issues take us right into the next area of our long-term economic plan, which is public safety. Just as we saw on the economic opportunity front, there's a correlation between the incidence of crime, particularly gun violence, and the consequence of population loss. The issue of public safety has been one that I personally worked extensively on throughout my career. And our greatest responsibility as a city, and mine as a mayor, is ensuring peace and safety in all of Chicago's neighborhoods. Now, we have seen significant gains recently in violence reduction, particularly drops in shootings and homicides. But we still have a long way to go, particularly when we compare ourselves to our peers like New York and Los Angeles. And that is why, over and above the other investments that we've made, we put an additional $11.5 million in this year's budget towards our comprehensive violence reduction strategy. This is, by the way, a 7-fold increase in funding over 2019. These new funds will allow us to expand community-based outreach, integrate trauma-informed victim services, and provide intensive youth-focused interventions for those who are at the highest risk of violence. In addition to our own city-driven efforts, we will continue to work closely with the state and the county and private funding partners, many of whom are in this room, who have really supported these efforts so that we can maximize investments and resources across Chicago to ensure our neighborhoods have access to the services and supports that they need and deserve. For example, in expanding our street outreach efforts, which by the way means people on the ground who have an encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhoods and who have the respect of local residents to intervene and prevent the next shooting. We will be supporting additional community-based outreach street workers trained to leverage their relationships and build trust in communities. We've seen dramatic results where these folks are on the ground and working in partnership with the police department. This will provide real-time, on-the-ground updates and utilize de-escalation skills to interrupt violence and prevent the retaliatory shootings that are a significant challenge, as well as connect these individuals with the highest risk of violence to a range of critical services. And as I said before, gun violence is a public health crisis. That is why we created a new pilot initiative to provide intensive support for youth and young adults at the highest risk of violence through cognitive behavioral therapy, case management, support services, combined with educational and employment opportunities. And this is an initiative created and led by Dr. Jackson and her team. In addition to inclusive economic development and public safety, we are focusing also, of course, on straightening out our city's finances. As I've spoken on this issue at length recently, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight, but I do want to highlight a few key points. Not only did we close a record $838 million budget gap, we did it by balancing a combination of progressive revenues with smart government efficiencies, while also strengthening our investments in communities most in need. And all of it delivered without a significant property tax increase. And that is definitely worth clapping about. As a result, over 60% of the budget gap was closed through structural solutions, not one-time fixes. It's for that reason that this budget was commended by the Civic Federation and all of our major credit rating agencies, among others, for its creativity and focus on reform-based structural solutions. The rating agencies also acknowledge the credibility of our 3-year fiscal plan and believe that the city will be on a path to fiscal stability as we work to achieve some of our key reforms. I also want to highlight the improvement in Chicago Public Schools, which was on a path towards fiscal ruin just a few years ago and has now successfully achieved fiscal stability and is fully climbing its own pension ramp, leading to its upgrade from Moody's, S&P, and Fitch rating agencies. And finally, I want to talk a little bit more about reform and ethics. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, the issue of ethics and good governance isn't simply a question of right and wrong. The issues of public corruption and the otherwise legalized system of give something to get something represents a hugely inefficient and counterproductive obstacles to expanding our growth opportunity and economic growth by means of rational, data-driven urban planning. As we saw with the example of Mount Henry, the absence of good ethical governance undercuts our ability to sustainably grow communities and serve our residents. It is also an enabling factor to the challenges we are grappling with as it relates to public safety and city finances, and its consequences extend even further than that. Some of you know, Chicago has a real branding problem. We are not only seen as a violent city, but also as a corrupt city. And that's a challenge for us when we try to tell the story of the great things that are happening in Chicago, not only at the national level, but also internationally. And as I mentioned earlier, we wasted no time in taking key steps toward our reform efforts, but that work is far from over. In the coming year, we will be advancing even further ethics reforms and strengthening our oversight capacity throughout city government. But government reforms extend beyond government ethics. Making Chicago the best city in the world to do business in also means reforming our regulatory environment by streamlining the process of how business gets done in Chicago. We need to think big, and our greatest success comes from when all of us are succeeding. There's nothing that will keep this from happening so long as we work hard, we remain focused, and we do it together. I'm humbled every day in my role as mayor of this great city, and I can't wait to continue working with all of you on the important message of making Chicago better together. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, Mayor, thank you so much for those remarks. And I really just wanted to start out with you. And you and I have come a long way from the University of Chicago Law School.
Yep.
We, neither one of us practicing law anymore. Can you tell us a little bit about your path as a child, and then your path professionally that led you to run for mayor?
To convince my wife of the crazy notion that I could run for mayor against an incumbent. Well, look, I credit a lot of who I am to my mother. She's tough, way tougher than me. She made a lot of sacrifices to make sure that all of the kids had the opportunity to really succeed and thrive in a way that she and my father were not able to, really because of their race, because of the time in which they grew up in, the challenging financial circumstances that we always found ourselves in. But the thing that my mother always told me is that nothing could hold me back. Not my race, not our financial status, not our gender. I had the ability to shape my own destiny. Now, when you're a kid and a parent says that to you, you really don't pay that much attention. But this was kind of a daily mantra in my household, and her expectations for me were really, really high. And so I took to it, even against some difficult circumstances, because I'm old enough that I grew up in a time when racial discrimination was still very much on the table. There's no question that I was denied opportunities solely on the basis of my race, but my mother's force of will really propelled me forward.
So that force of will carries on in you, and in your professional career, how important was it for you to have been a federal prosecutor in your professional career? Was that an important part of
No,
who you are?
it was life-changing. I mean, I see some of my former colleagues that are here in the room. To be a trial lawyer, there's no better training place than the U.S. Attorney's Office, in my view. It gave me an opportunity not only to expand my skill set as a lawyer, but it led me to see the city in a very different light. I was involved in a lot of investigations, whether they were violent crime or drugs cases, and also public corruption. I tried and convicted an alderman that really kind of opened my eyes up to city government and the city of Chicago in a much more profound way.
And you had some interesting public roles with the police and under former mayors. And how important was that in your decision ultimately to run for office?
Well, I think having those experiences with the police department, the 911 center, and the city's procurement department gave me a lot of insight into how city government worked, and really gave me the confidence that I had the ability and the experience to be able to take on this most challenging job. So those experiences definitely were factored into my calculus.
I mean, it was a really improbable story. When you started out, Mayor Rahm had not withdrawn.
Yep.
He hadn't yet said he wasn't going to run. What motivated you? And give us a little bit of insight into not only the motivation, but this crazy thing that you said to tell your wife that you really thought that you could win this thing and become the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Well, that took a little bit of time. She wasn't easily convinced. Well, really what motivated me is what I talked about tonight. You know, I have been incredibly fortunate in my life, and coming from where I came from, sitting here as the mayor of the third largest city in the country absolutely wasn't in my trajectory at all, but also going to the University of Chicago and having the amazing career that I was able to put together, my relationships with Mayor Brown and the other opportunities that opened up. But what I saw, particularly in thinking about what can we do about gun violence in our city, what I saw is this incredible disparity. And I meant what I said, and I believe it to be true. A lot of what we're seeing around gun violence is really an epidemic of hopelessness. I mean, there's too many young people that are growing up in really dire circumstances that just don't believe in themselves, don't have people surrounding them that are showing them love and hope. And I just felt like we could do better as a city, and I truly believe what I said. I think there's a moral imperative to make sure that we are dealing everybody into the success of Chicago, but there are real economic costs for all of us. As our city shrinks, the people who remain that are in dire circumstances, their needs are exponentially growing, and there's a cost to that. So I think that we have to do something to solve these problems. I know that we can. I think we're on a path to get it done, but we really need the support of people in this room and elsewhere to really make that happen and understand that truly this isn't just altruistic, that we are better and stronger as a city when people in every neighborhood believe that they have a stake in their future is here in Chicago.
So that's a motivation, but how did you run the calculus that you could actually win the election? Because it's an unbelievable story.
Yeah, and look, the reality is where I thought we were, you know, when we announced in May of 18, obviously the landscape changed significantly when the former mayor dropped out and then the floodgates opened up. And at the time, before certain people got knocked off the ballot, there were 21 people that were running. And that completely changed the landscape. And those were some tough times because we had a lot of momentum going into the summer and right before Labor Day. But then when he announced, we had a moment where we were the front runner, and then suddenly every other name jumped in that were people who had been elected officials for a long time. I won't say forever because that's not polite. But also who, you know, had names that were household names, who were able to raise incredible sums of money. And so I think not many people gave us a chance. But I felt like the message and the reason why I got in still had resonance and that it was important. So we just kept plugging along. And, you know, I'm the first to admit the corruption that kind of reared its head at the end of November when the FBI raided Ed Burke's City Hall offices and his ward offices. And I remember quite clearly on a Friday afternoon getting a call from a reporter of the Tribune who said, I can't get anybody named the front runners to actually talk to me about this issue. And I said, well, I'll talk to you. And that started a conversation that really, I think, ignited across the city. And what I took away from a lot of that and my victory is people were just sick and tired of the status quo. Because it's not just, it wasn't just individual residents who felt like, I don't want to have to worry about, am I currying favor? Did I give a political donation to the local alderman? I've heard it from, you know, people in Fortune 100 companies that said having 50 sets of rules that change all the time makes it impossible for us to have predictable planning, to make sure that we're growing in the right direction. And frankly, we don't want to have to pay all these political donations and so forth. So this was a thing that I think really galvanized people all across the city. And the more I talk, the more other people ran for cover. And I think that's then what became a real difference maker.
Well, and here you are, and you have this very ambitious plan for inclusive growth. I'm sure some of the people here tonight didn't understand the population growth or stagnation in population that we have, and the importance that you place on growing that population by a full 10%. And that is going to be a real challenge. Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the things that I hear a lot is there's a lot of backing in the business community for the concept of inclusive growth. Mm-hmm. In the neighborhoods, we're all in it together. What would you say, though, to the many people who, when they hear that, feel like something is going to be taken away, or that downtown, the engine of the economy in Chicago, is somehow going to be marginalized in the effort for inclusive growth throughout the city?
Well, look, the reality is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And everyone on my team recognizes the importance of making sure that our downtown area remains vibrant and thriving. That's what people outside of Chicago recognize us for. It's an asset that a lot of cities across the country, and I know this now from talking to a lot of mayors, our downtown area is an envy of most other places in the country. So we can't lose focus on that and making sure that we're doing everything to keep making those investments and thriving. But I meant what I said in my remarks earlier, and anybody who's heard me talk about these issues has heard me say this before. If we keep losing population, we keep losing people from core neighborhoods on the south and the west side, we cannot be a great global city. We're losing customers, we're losing businesses, we're losing talent that we should have that are populating the businesses all over our city. We have to spend more on public safety and restitching the safety net for people that are struggling in neighborhoods. That's money that could be diverted elsewhere. And that's why I say, I think there is a moral imperative, but there's a pure fiscal reality that's staring us in the face, that if we don't take care of what's happening in our neighborhoods, now more than ever, then we are going to have major problems, not down the road, right on over the horizon.
Well, do you see yourself as the spokesperson for the city of Chicago on the global stage, the salesman in chief?
I have to be, right? I mean, I think that goes with the territory, and to really be an advocate for our city. So we're looking at ways in which we can better tell the Chicago story externally, but also internally. There's so much greatness that's going on in our city that we don't do a good enough job of talking about. And I think we've got to take ownership of our own destiny and tell our story on a bigger stage, but also tell it to our residents. We are more than crime statistics. We are more than the challenges that we're facing from a fiscal perspective. There are really, really good things that are happening in our city, and we've got to do a better job of telling that story.
And so you do see your role as changing that narrative.
No question about it.
Both, again, both recruiting people to come to the city, whether it's for tourism or corporate headquarters, but also to our own residents.
That's right.
And so let's talk a little bit about the budget. Mm-hmm. And you did receive a lot of credit for having a balanced budget. There are some things in there that maybe won't be repeatable in the coming years. And you do have the pension ramps as you described them. Mm-hmm. So how do you hope to deal with some of those key financial issues as we move forward?
Well, the biggest thing on our priority list is making sure that we get a Chicago casino up and running. And the reason for that is the monies from that casino are dedicated to shoring up our police and fire pensions. That's really mission critical, something that we're talking with legislators about every day. We came very, very close in the veto session to making that happen. I feel confident that we're going to be able to get it done in the spring session. And hopefully legislators won't see it as an opportunity to string tinsel on the Christmas tree, which is part of what derailed it in the veto session. But it's really, really important. We are focused on making sure that we have real structural solutions. That's why I talk about it all the time, and it's something we're very proud of. The rating agencies, I think, really latched onto that. When we walk in as a new administration and we've got an $830 million budget deficit, and we get to 60% structural fixes, that's a pretty significant accomplishment, and I don't mind saying it. But that still means that we've got 40% of one-timers that we've got to deal with. And one of the ways that we continue to move forward, we're going to continue to look for efficiencies. And I think we were very, very conservative in projecting those for 2020. I think there's more that we're going to gain on a number of issues, particularly around overtime and absenteeism, which is costing us a significant amount of money, and there hasn't been a real focus on that. I'm very, very focused on it. So if you're a city commissioner here, let the word go out again. But I also think that we've got to think, that's why we're focused on growth. Now that's not a next year's solution, but we've got to lay the foundation for that now.
And you mentioned your pride that there were no steep property tax increases in the budget, which, how important do you think the tax burden is in growing our population?
Look,
how are those linked together in your mind?
Well, look, I think that the unpredictability of what the taxes are going to look like, both in the city and at the state level, and property taxes in particular. I mean, that has become like the third rail. Everywhere I went, in every neighborhood, people of all demographics would say to me, Mayor, please, whatever you do, don't raise our property taxes. So we just came off of, in 18, an historically large property tax increase. We still have an unsettled terrain when it comes to property tax assessments. People all over the city were hit with a significant increase in the assessment values. So in that environment, raising property taxes, to me, was just throwing up the white flag. I didn't want to do that. I'm happy that we were able to avoid it. We still need help from Springfield so we can really maintain our ability to avoid a huge property tax increase, but I'm very focused on that.
Well, let's talk about the city-state relationship, because if you think about Chicago being the engine for the state, what do you want the relationship between the city and the state to be?
Well, I think we have a very good, and I have personally a very good relationship with the governor, but the governor isn't the entirety of that conversation. And so one of the things that I've been doing is really trying to build relationships with other mayors across the state, but also with other state legislators. I was down in Peoria last week, had very good meetings with a number of state legislators there, and to just continue to build those relationships. There's no shortcut, and there's nothing you can do other than really sit down and have a conversation with people and let them know that we're not just the arrogant cousin from up north, that we really care about making sure that we build relationships. And the reality is, if you look at cities and towns across our state, particularly around pensions, while the scale is different, we're all experiencing very similar challenges. So for better or for worse, we have a kinship with other mayors around some of these other issues. And the truth is, Chicago is the economic engine, not just of the state, but of the upper Midwest. And we have to assume our rightful role, but make sure that we're building partnerships with other parts of the state.
What do you attribute the fact to that we didn't get the benefits on the casino and you didn't get the real estate transfer tax legislation you were hoping for?
Well, look, I think it was a tough lift in the short period of veto session to get it done. But I do think it was attributable to a couple things. It didn't help that on the very first day of the veto session, there was a criminal charge announced of a legislator for around gaming. I felt like at that point we may not even be in the conversation. So I felt grateful that we were actually able to move forward, because I thought, when that news came down that Monday, I thought, all right, well, let's try spring session because it's not going to happen. I mean, I think the other thing is, in the narrow window of opportunity in a veto session, there were a lot of people who were saying to us, well, I was promised this, I was promised that. And that then they saw this piece of legislation, and particularly around casinos, as their one opportunity to get something that they felt like they were promised.
And that's the Christmas tree.
Oh yeah, and people came out of the woodwork with their letters to Santa. So it was a very challenging environment. But despite that, we came very close. We had, by our whip count, we had 55 votes in the House. We needed 60. So we were close despite those odds. But, again, it's about building relationships and really doing, I think, a better job, particularly around real estate transfer tax, of articulating what it is that our ask is. Our ask isn't for state legislators to vote on a tax increase for Chicago. It's to give us the right and have it at the city council level. So we've got work to do, and we recognize that.
But you're optimistic that two of those important revenue raisers for the city they're on your Christmas list, and maybe it may take to next year, but you're optimistic?
Yeah, and we have a couple of other things, and I won't tell them all of our secrets, but we have a couple of things.
It's just the two of us.
We have a couple other things that we're looking at that I think could be revenue difference makers for us, and we'll see how it goes in the spring session.
So you've had some real successes, and I would say there have been some challenges in just the 7 months you've been the mayor. Of course, you had the teacher strike, and that was obviously quite challenging. albeit resolved.
That's a supreme understatement.
And I'm not known for understatement usually, but and then you've had the situation with the superintendent of police. Can you give us some insight into both of those situations?
Sure.
And your thoughts of how you see your role in those different but both very difficult situations?
Well, on the situation with the CTU, and I want to distinguish the relationship with the union leadership from the relationship with teachers. We felt like it was really important for us to really speak our values in that, and articulate to the teachers that we value them, that we knew that they were an important part of creating a safe and nurturing environment for our students as well as the support staff. So some people have said, well, Mayor, wasn't a better strategy to kind of lowball the teachers and then build to the place that you wanted to get to? But a couple of things about that. This was not a normal negotiation, in part because all of the sequences of the negotiations to some extent were prescribed by state statute. So we, as mandatory, we had an independent fact finder who we made our pitch to. He came out with a set of findings. We had offered initially 14% increase over 5 years. He said, no, we agree with the 5 years, but you need to increase it to 16%. And my goal was to try to forestall a strike, not surprisingly. Unfortunately, it became very clear by the end of the summer and certainly into September that a strike was inevitable. Now, we still worked hard to try to avoid it, but by the time that the strike actually happened, there were like 20 plus open items where we had given substantive proposals on that CTU hadn't gotten back to us on at all. And that's why, if you paid attention to the strike, we spent a significant amount of time talking about we need a comprehensive plan and really trying to build a public narrative around that. But again, I really credit Dr. Jackson, Chief Education Officer Dr. McDade, and the team, because they were at the table on the front lines. And while I was getting, multiple updates a day, and particularly as the strike wore on, it was really them that bore the brunt of it. And what I would say is, I'm glad that we had 5 years. I think that's important. But I really feel like we've got a lot of work to do to restore faith in CPS amongst our families and our young people. I hate that our seniors in particular, that a big part of their remembrance of their senior year is the strike and the lost opportunities, the stress that they had around applying for school, the people that participated in extracurriculars and sports, that those were lost because of a strike that didn't need to happen. But we can, and I know Dr. Jackson and her team have really dug in to make sure that we bridge the divide there, and that we continue to build relationship with teachers and staff. Regarding Superintendent Johnson, look, I have, as should be clear by now, I have an expectation that the people that work for me and the people that have the honor of serving as public servants are going to do so with integrity, full stop. And when you don't do that, and not only when you fail, as we all do, we all make mistakes, we're all humans. But when you do it, you've got to own responsibility for it. What you cannot do is lie about it. You cannot lie to the public, and you cannot lie to me. That's something that I'm just never going to tolerate or countenance. And so, look, I had a long relationship with the superintendent. There are a lot of things that I think we were able to accomplish for the good under his watch. But the bottom line is you must serve with integrity. And if you can't do that, you got to go.
So, it's a simple thing that our parents taught us, but unbelievably, it often does not really work out in life that way. So thank you for that. So two last questions. One is, how do you see the role of the business community, the universities, and the foundations in terms of what we can do to support this inclusive growth, and how you intend to support that community?
Well, the first thing is that I think, particularly through the Invest Southwest initiative and our larger process of creating a comprehensive plan for economic growth and development, we need your support. We have a lot of really, really smart people on our team, but we can't do this work without making sure that we are dealing you in, that we are seeking your input on how we move forward together as a community. I think that's incredibly important. So that's issue one. Issue two is look for ways in which you can dig down deeper, and many of you are incredibly generous in your charitable giving already, but I'd ask you to think about, can you give a little bit more? And by that I mean, look at ways in which you can look at opportunities to build workforce development opportunities, to hire a few more people. Really think about what are the job descriptions. Do you really need, for example, somebody who's got a college degree, or can you fill those positions with people who have real life work experience that are great people who are enthusiastic and want to come and work for you? When we talk about, for example, the Austin community having $200 million a year in buying power, that's real. That's a real economic engine and source, and we've got stories of that all over the city that we're happy to share that data with you. But think about how you can invest and help us stand up healthy and supportive neighborhoods. Now, it's not like this work hasn't been going on. It has, but it's been siloed and it hasn't been comprehensive. And so what we're trying to do is to say, all this good work that's happening across the city in philanthropy, or I'm looking at my friend Leslie Bloom, who started Chicago Cares and all the great work that they have done over the years. How do we partner with you to break things out of the silos and bring it to scale so that we can move forward together?
So last question. This may be an understatement too, but you have a great job, but obviously the job is exceedingly complex. Mm-hmm. You're all in, it's very difficult. What do, you, Lori Lightfoot, to de-stress, to relax, to have a good time? I heard about the cigar, but is there anything else?
And scotch.
And scotch, okay.
Well, I'm an incredible sports fanatic, and so my guilty pleasure is reading a bunch of sports blogs that I look at every single day. I'm dreaming that the Bears will actually get a consistent offense and kicker.
All right.
And that maybe next year my beloved White Sox will actually be able to turn the corner.
All right. Well, with that, I'd like to all say thank you so much to Mayor Lightfoot for being here with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.